the company I wanted to talk about, and I mean, like half of Twitter is talking about them, it's Delph, and it's like a 300 million compliance catastrophe. So Delph is a Y Combinator company that is essentially selling compliance automations, whether it's like SOC 2, which is for basically cybersecurity, or like HIPAA compliance for healthcare, or just GDPR for like European like data retention and stuff like this. And if you want to work in like these regions, if you want to work in these industries, or maybe if you want to sell to enterprise companies as a vendor, you need to get such a certificate. And so what happened is, like a couple of weeks ago, an anonymous Substack account posted a very extensive post, which is basically claimed that Delph has been generating these fraudulent audit reports for their customers, lying about all the security measures, and fabricating evidence. And like this obviously created an entire avalanche, because a whole bunch of tech startups out there have been secured by Delph. They even have this badge on their website, because that's sort of like what Delph would provide to you. And there's a reason why all of them went to Delph in the first place, because they promised to do it cheaply, they promised to do it quickly. And of course, like you just want to get a certificate. Your actual goal is to, like grow the company, sell to the client, move on. It's sort of like you just want to get over this hump. But sort of like the problem is that once people no longer trust you, and if you work in like a security or a compliance, it's getting real scary for you, because every claim that you've essentially made, every success story, every marketing activity that you've had, they're now working against you. And like it's like this rare occasion where even like many of their investors are not backing that up, like inside partners who've backed them previously quietly removed the extensive blog post about Delph. And their CEO issued a response, which is probably like, it probably would not get in the Hall of Fame of like crisis responses, at least for me, because it basically amounts to two thoughts. First is they didn't do anything wrong, and the second is they will be rebuilding everything inside their company, which I think sort of like doesn't really play well with each other. And
Wait, so then they're not saying that that it's not true.
yeah, because I mean, it's hard. They're playing on like technicalities, and like just like answering the questions that nobody really asked, while ignoring the sort of like the hard things. While it seems that in the background they're like moving a lot of stuff. They're moving to like a different auditor. But the real problem is that anonymous Substacker, who is basically posing as like a former customer of theirs, a former user, they posted a new post which is detailing even more, including leaked Slack messages, which are, well, they're not great for Delph. If you take a look at them, like TechCrunch has like a copy of the story, and you can just look at their original piece. Like they're extremely bad. They're basically confirms that it wasn't like like a rare omission on their part. It was like something that they were actively pursuing. It's why they chose this specific auditor. And now the problem is that, again, all of the signals are now working against them, because I've been in chat with like some founders the chats are mostly for comms, but they're discussing other things in there. And I've seen several of them, like immediately ask, hey, are we actually using Delph? Like imagine this happening across every startup out there just because they saw the news about you. And right now, their own branding is basically collapsing on themselves, because if you work, again, in such a sensitive area as compliance or security, you don't really have this easy way out. Once something happens, people start questioning you immediately. And the worst thing that could happen is like there's this project called LLM that was breached, and it was secured by Delph sort of like through two of their audits previously. And I mean, audits sometimes miss things. It's natural, actually, but the sequence of these events and how they were spaced in time is just extremely bad for them, because it just confirmed the meme. And now, sort of like, if you are thinking about, okay, what company do I need to choose for this? What vendor? It's just hard to imagine that any customer would go to Delph, at least as their first choice.
Yeah, it's funny. We covered Delve on the podcast because they sent out doormats. They wrote a post about it where they were mentioning how they had taken Brex's original like champagne strategy of, sending champagne bottles to companies that had just announced their like I think C to like Series A, a change. So they did a twist on that, which was doing the doormats and saying it was pretty much saying like not for your shoes, but something for your socks too, right? So your sock too. So I was like, oh, it's a clever play on words. So we, talked about it. And then, you start seeing them, come out with like the types of companies that are on there. Cluely was on there. They became like startup darlings where it's like, oh, because of the hype that they got from, tweeting about what they were doing in terms of marketing, that got them more brand name customers. I'm surprised that the, CEO kind of came out with this non-response to like, what is the actual problem of like, hey, can we trust everything that you did? I saw Austin Allred post how a founder had tweeted that like, hey, we're trying to go through like SOC 2 compliance. And then they're like, oh, 24 hours later, Delve did it for us. And like, Austin's like, everyone that's been through the SOC 2 process knows that it doesn't happen that quickly, because it's a huge process of having to go through all your financial like details, which is the whole point of why you want to hire somebody else to do it instead of trying to do it in-house. So there's all these little things that are like coming out now that like make it seem as if it makes sense that this has happened. And I think that's another like PR thing that like people don't really talk about, that like somewhere along the way there are little clues that come out, and when a bigger story comes out that shows that you were doing something wrong, all those things are going to come out and people are going to have those receipts for you, especially on Twitter. I talked about this last week, this whole idea of like retroactive like hate, right? Where it's like people can like you all up until something bad comes out about you, and then all of a sudden they'll go back and like change how they felt about you. So last week's story was that people went had given reviews to a Hachette book, and then they went back to Goodreads and said like, now that I know that she's used AI, I hate this book. And that's what you're showing here, that like the corporate investor. Add this to the another one off the Forbes under 30 list that has now had some form of wrongdoing.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast of Alex Conrad, formerly from Forbes, who like had very reasonable things. So look, most like there are a bunch of like great people that have been there. Like I mean, Taylor Swift was on Forbes 30 under 30, and sort of like nobody's laughing about this. But right now, every sort of like counterexample that they have is sort of like getting a lot more attention, and it's like it's interesting what they're going to do with like this list. Like I think they might even want to like change something internally, or maybe they would actually want to like ride the meme even further and just like continue doing so.
Yeah, right. Just come out with like this year's class of fraudulent startups.
Yeah, that would be bad. Yeah, so if you get into lessons, like I feel the first one, and I think it's probably the most broadly applied, is that AI powered is not a business model, because part of all of these allegations is that Delve barely had any AI at all. It sort of like was just, like a few basic prompts built on top of like some kind of like AI provider that they had, but they didn't really have these genuine AI workflows that they could have done probably, right, in order to extract this information from your like corporate systems to prepare like the necessary forms and statements and documents. But instead, sort of like what this user claimed is that they basically had to redo everything manually. And we're now at the market where there's just a lot more attention to AI companies. Being an AI company warrants a pretty huge premium on your valuation, on like just everything about you. And there's a huge incentive to claim that you have AI, whether you actually have it or not. And I feel like it's getting a little bit oversaturated at this point. So like people are just, like trying to really sniff it out if you actually have something, how good it actually is. And another part of the problem is that as if you're focusing purely on AI capabilities, then you just end up competing on features. And like next week, there could be somebody else who have slightly better AI features and everybody will just run there. It's sort of like what's been happening with like this leading stage with like the state-of-the-art AI models, right? So like, okay, 1 week everybody loves Flow Code. Next week, okay, Codex is better. Actually, let's go to Codex. And then sort of like, who knows where they will actually go next. The next one, and like we sort of like touched a little bit upon that, is that the brand that promises a shortcut to trust is just the most fragile brand possible. Because I'm sure there could have been companies like similar to Delve in sort of like unrelated industries that could have survived this just for the sake of like being like big already, too big to fail. And I think we've seen examples of like such companies really. But the problem is that, yeah, like right now, everything is literally working against them. And any company that switched away from them, it sort of like becomes like yet another stone, right? Or like there's been like discussions that Lovable switched from them. And like, okay, now every big logo leaving you is just like adding to that pressure. So like if you're building in one of these like very sensitive industries, you have to be extremely careful about how you market yourself, how you promote yourself, and you can never really make any shortcuts. Just because like even like the audience that you have specifically is probably very sensitive to this, and then everybody around you, they will just stop trusting you if they hear about any wrongdoings. And like the final lesson is just, I think a good crisis strategy is always rooted in product and business decisions, and you cannot just post your way out of it if you don't do anything right. And I feel like this is at least allegedly a case where sort of like the company was itself built on pretty fraudulent foundations, and there's just like no way to get out of it, especially again, if we apply the previous lesson as well.
Yeah. My lesson here is the more that you're out there and like marketing yourself as like doing these things that seem impossible, it's probably because it is. There was always that question in people's minds, and then once this kind of came out, it answered people's questions. So even if it turned out that there wasn't something wrong, the fact that people were like willing to accept it as quickly as they did shows you that there's something that people were already thinking. And we kind of saw this also with the whole chaperone discourse that happened, right? Where her security guard, frightened a child, and she had to come out and say, oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. That wasn't my security guard and everything. But the point wasn't that this situation happened. It was that she wasn't really given the space to come out and give her side of the story before people already glommed onto the fact that, of course, she would do this because she's previously yelled at paparazzi. All these things like add towards, the brand that you're building, much like, Delve kind of had the brand that they were building. And it gives people, kind of it forms an idea in people's mind that yes, this is totally likely, and that doesn't happen with other brands that like are given a chance to kind of respond or that respond quickly to the crisis. Like, was it Shopify? Yes, Shopify, who had like, Toby had to come out and like, say something, and they, came and like cleared the air almost immediately, right? So these are things that you, as in like, if you have to do crisis PR, are thinking about. It's like, hey, what's coming out? What is it that we need to respond to immediately because it's making us look bad? And then when we respond to it, is it actually a legitimate response to what people are asking, or are we trying to talk around the story, which is kind of like what happened here?
Yeah,
Um,
it's like a rare case where nobody really came to their defense. Like people might
yeah.
have liked their post, but I haven't seen that even from like some of the people who would expect it from. So
Yeah. The VCs were strangely quiet about this whole thing. So moving on to another PR disaster. Sora is dead. OpenAI announced that they're shutting down Sora, the video generation tool that it launched last September. So only about 6 months. The product peaked at about 1 million users after launch, and it was losing roughly $1 million a day. What stands out to me here is Disney didn't hear about it until basically an hour before the public statement was made, which meant that most of Disney and most of like the executives were finding out at the same time that the rest of us were. It's coming out now that Disney executives were shocked that this was happening. And so it was supposed to be a $1 billion investment that Disney was making into OpenAI. At the time, we talked about it here and said that it really didn't make sense for Disney, but that was also a decision that was made by Bob Iger, who also left Disney, and now new Disney CEO Josh D'Amaro can be out there saying that like, well, that was a Bob Iger decision. It's not what I want. Part of what he was saying when he came out as like the new CEO was saying that they were going to focus more on like human creators and not so much like AI. So I think this kind of fits in with what they actually wanted. They also never really made that investment of $1 billion. So it doesn't really seem as if they're like missing out on much. But yeah, Yuri, would love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I think the interesting problem with OpenAI is that on one hand, they're like going, like out there building like extremely large data centers, buying all the RAM in the world. And on the
Yeah.
other, they operate like a Series B like startup, like scrappy and like ready to adjust their timeline at any moment. And these two things just don't play together, especially
Mm,
as it applies to comms and policy. Like you need to be a lot more careful about what kind of public statements you make and
mhm,
especially how you communicate with partners. Because if you've been involved in any kind of like announcement with big company, look, all of these stakeholders, they should have been pre-briefed, they should be aligned because look, Disney is obviously, they're extremely precious about their characters and their IP because it's their
mm,
main asset. They don't really have much of anything. I mean, yeah, they have parks and they have like Disney Plus and everything, but ultimately what powers all of this is just the IP. And so the fact that they were willing to give it to any AI company, that was a
mhm,
break for like, but that's sort of like what made Sora interesting in the first place. And now, yeah, like first of all, they might lock it down forever, or they might go to like a different company. But think about what it means for any other like potential future partner of OpenAI. Like, can you actually trust them on that front? That's a very problematic direction. And another like sort of like what I'm seeing is just like, yeah, like they have this internal communications, sort of like something that Sam is sort of like telling them at all hands meetings, or maybe like sending emails. And I feel like all of these like big tech companies at this point should accept that basically everything that they will issue like company wide internally will become public. So
mhm,
they should write all of their amendments, keeping in mind that the whole world might be their audience. And it's sort of
mm,
like that's why you cannot really sort of like issue like very different statements internally and externally, because yeah, it's pretty clear sort of like why they did it, because obviously it's burning a lot of money and they don't really have that many users to show for, and they need all of this compute for their like actual like productive models
mhm.
for again either productivity or coding. But like you can then just first say this publicly and then wind it out gracefully, because yes, I understand generation might be burning a lot of resources.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The thing that actually brought to mind right now, Yuri, with what you were saying is if they are kind of having those messages internally and sending those like memos, back and forth with like company, there's more of a uh, like chance that those messages will leak before they actually want the messaging to go out. It wouldn't surprise me that he wanted to keep the cards close at hand so that the message wouldn't get out before he actually wanted it to, and have like, a worse reaction to this. Cause it is kind of, a pretty big fail on their part that this, huge feature that they launched isn't working and isn't doing that well, which also kind of says a lot about where AI video is to me.
Yeah, for sure.
A couple lessons for me is that the more that you kind of hype something up, the harder the fall down when you have to like close it down. Especially since it wasn't that long in between the two. So I definitely think that a lot more people are going to start questioning the next announcement that they make that they say is, as transformative. The other thing is never let a partner find out about the news through a news alert. What's to say that Disney's going to trust them the next time that, OpenAI approaches them? And at some point, they're going to want to, right? Because Disney has that IP that they want.
Exactly. And I mean, as any good lawyer would tell you, that if you're about to write anything down or like send an email, imagine a jury reading it. And like the same
Yeah.
basically applies to all internal communications. So if you're writing an internal statement, just at a big tech company or like a leading AI lab, just expect people to share it like the media, like publicly, and then just accommodate this in your writing.
That's what happened with Meta, right? A lot it was basically the jury reading internal documents from Meta that led the jury to make the decision that it did. So, yes, beware of all emails and, text Slack messages and everything that's held internally because they can be called into any any lawsuit in the future.